Hi, and welcome to September's Q&A. This is for Patreon supporters, but it does go public after a week or two to everyone else. The list of questions that I've got this month are threefold. And I'll start with the first one on the list over on the Patreon post from Brendan O'Neill. Hey Matt, I'd love your thoughts on how the narrative plays out with solo role-playing games. By nature of having an audience on YouTube, you're taking us through the steps, but when truly solo, how much dialogue do you picture? What's the pace? How much time do you make? How much time do you take to make a character decision? For me, it's easy to race along if I don't make a concerted effort to slow the pace down. I'm wondering if talking it out loud or bullet journaling would help. Thanks, Brendan, for the question. I've made some notes for all three of these questions, so this can hopefully go a little bit more smoothly than me just rambling on and thinking about what the answer might be. So first of all, the thing I'd like to mention is that it is very different, as I'm sure you can imagine, doing it for a YouTube video than it is when you're doing it truly solo, as you're saying, just doing it by yourself with no one watching and no one intending to be an audience, either written or visual or whatever. When I'm doing it by myself and there's no target audience intended, then it tends to be less dialogue heavy, if that makes sense. I tend to look at it more in terms of story beats often. I will sometimes slow it down and do dialogue if I feel it's important. But once I get going, it tends to be a lot faster for obvious reasons than when I'm doing it for YouTube, because I'm not explaining everything as I go. I can just kind of look things up, roll the dice, figure things out, consult the oracles, and it just kind of, as you've said, it kind of rattles along fairly quickly. What I can do. I also find that I make character decisions maybe a little bit faster, because again, I'm probably not necessarily trying to think of how to explain that decision to a watching audience. However, my oracle interpretations tend to be slower than on an actual play. On an actual play, I'm aware of that there is, even if it's pre-recorded, which all my solo stuff is, I'm aware of editing time and editing burden. So I don't usually... I usually try to come to a decision fairly quickly with oracles, even though that does get edited out, the umming and awing that I'm doing in the background. When I'm doing it truly by myself, I will often take a lot of time. I'll sometimes pause the game and go down internet searches and things, look for, I don't know, all sorts of stuff to try and figure things out. I might even go on Discord and, consult the hive mind. I won't always make it very clear that that's why I'm doing it, but I will sometimes ask questions about something. I have done that a few times. So yeah, that tends to be a lot slower. But yeah, those are the kind of the main differences between them. In terms of slowing the pace down, I think the things that you mentioned would definitely help. I tend to try and bullet journal when I'm doing stuff. So for those of you who don't necessarily know what that means, a bullet journal is an actual type of journal you can buy and a type of journaling method that you can look up. That's not what's meant here. What's meant here is journaling a solo game. That means taking notes as you're going along. And bullet, I'm assuming this is what you mean, by the way, taking bullet notes. So rather than writing it out as prose, excuse me, I was about to sneeze there. Some people use solo gaming as a method of, as like a writing aid. So we'll actually write out prose for their solo games. But if you're just trying to keep track of things and trying to slow the pace down, just keeping bullets of what's been happening is how I do it. And that's probably what I would recommend as well. Because you're not slowing the pace down too much, but you are keeping track. It also makes it more likely that you're going to return to that story at another time, at another sitting, because you've kept track of everything that's gone to date. It's very easy when it's bullets to kind of look at, oh yeah, all this stuff happened, oh, I'd like to continue that story. Whereas if you're not doing that, you can kind of, and let's say life gets in the way, you're busy for a week or two, you might completely forgot what had gone on there. Maybe you'd scribbled a note at the end, oh, this happened, I need to look into this. But if you're not actually journaling it, then it can be quite hard to get back in. So yeah, hopefully that answered your questions, Brendan. Thanks very much. Next question is from Michael Edmonds. From the Discord, how big and what is on your gaming to-do list? Or at least the ones you can talk about. Specifically, this was a Discord conversation where I had mentioned that there's a Symbaroum hack for Year Zero Mini on my gaming to do on my development to do list. So I'm assuming but this is quite a few weeks back when this was discussed as well. But I'm gonna make the assumption that you're talking specifically about my development, like games that I'm working on, things that I'm working on. And it is a big old list. I've written down all the stuff as well from my Trello board. I'm not going to share the Trello board because there's some stuff on there that I don't really want to make public just yet for various reasons. I'll actually touch on some of that in a sec. But basically, looking at Year Zero Mini and Year Zero Lite to start off with. Stiletto obviously is the game I'm working on right now. I've talked about it a fair amount on Discord. There is going to be some content coming out on the channel very soon in the future as well. But Stiletto is a kind of low fantasy urban game that's inspired by Renaissance Italy, although it is fantasy. And there's a lot of intrigue and social stuff in it. It uses a new take on the Year Zero Mini Lite rules. So I'm calling it Year Zero Mini rules. I'm calling it the prototype for Year Zero Lite. So there are skills in it. There aren't any talents. There'll be a playtest coming out in October in time for Halloween with an adventure. I've ran it 3 times, twice at a convention a few weeks ago, and once online for some people, and some other people have run it as well to help with some playtesting. So that's on the cusp of coming out very, very shortly, like within a month. That will be out for the public to consume. Outside of Stilettos, that's the main project. There's a team built for that as well, so that also helps with motivation, keep things racking along rather than my own like individual solo projects, if you will. But outside of that, here's the list of other stuff I've got. First thing I should probably mention are the ones that I have worked on previously. So that would be really Nord Saga and Pitchfork. Nord Saga is on hiatus for a while. I don't know when I'm going to pick that back up again. I had a lot of alt-right / neo-Nazis who contacted me a lot. I had a few contact me expressing interest in the game, and that killed all the motivation, my enthusiasm for it. And since then, I haven't really wanted to come back to it. I do plan to come back to it. It's just at the moment there are other projects that are higher up in the queue. One of those is Pitchfork. Pitchfork is a game where you play peasants in a village in an assumed kind of rural Germany in the high to late Middle Ages. I'm deliberately going to be keeping that a bit vague so you can kind of plug and play it into any kind of setting that you might want. But the idea is that all the players are peasants, and it's a bit Call of Cthulhu-y in a way, in that Call of Cthulhu you tend to be playing normal people who can't really go to the authorities because who's going to believe you, and you've got to solve these massive mythos problems yourselves. And Pitchfork is very much the same in that as peasants, your lord or lady is most likely not going to be interested in your petty problems. All they're interested in is that you're producing for them, in terms of whatever your village produces. And so you've got to really look out for your village yourself. So when bad things start happening, there's very much an implied supernatural element to Pitchfork, in that the sort of folklore-y things are assumed to be true. So there are things that go bump in the night. There are also things like nobles who get bored and get up to no good. If your noble is murdering people or other bad things to people in your village, you kind of can't go anywhere for help. You've got to sort it out yourself. So there's like a whole lot of, it's a very horror kind of folk horror focus to this game. And I'm planning on that being no rule, like there won't be a rule set in it. It's going to be system neutral. So really, again, pick up and plug it into any system that you like. There will be an appendix with probably a Year Zero Mini implementation to it, but that will be completely optional. That's next on my plate after Stiletto. I really am very highly motivated to return to Pitchfork, and it's just a very big project. There's a lot of work still to be done on it, and I can't really tackle 2 big projects simultaneously, really. It's quite hard to do. So other than that, here are the other projects I'm working on. I've got on my to-do list, I should say. I have Year Zero Mini or Year Zero Lite implementations planned for a sort of generic low fantasy Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay inspired game. This won't have any setting. It'll just be mechanics that I'm expecting people to use it to play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, really, which is one of my favorite games. But it'll be Year Zero Mini, so it'll be quite lightweight. Maybe Year Zero Light using the stiletto rules. We'll see how that comes. Symbaroum, I'm planning on doing a similar approach. So assumed Symbaroum-ish setting, but there won't be any setting involved. It'll be a more rural, very much a game focused on exploring a dark forest, basically, full of, bad things. And I'll probably mimic the available kin or races or ancestry, whatever they're called, in Symbaroum for that. So no elves, but all the other ones. Kentucky Zombie Apocalypse is a game I'm going to be playtesting, actually. I've got that mostly written as a Year Zero Light game, but I'm going to be, and I've actually playtested a little bit as a Year Zero Light game, but I'm actually looking at taking it back to Year Zero Mini, because I feel the Year Zero Light implementation is maybe just a bit too heavy for what I wanted with it. And Kentucky Zombie Apocalypse is Year Zero Mini or Year Zero Light with the alien stress dice tacked on. Which works really, really well. So I'm quite excited to get that one out the door. And because it's mostly written already, there's really just flavor tables and things that are left. That might actually see a playtest document being made public this year before Christmas. We'll see. But that's probably something that's relatively straightforward and low effort on my part to finish the last steps and get out for people to start looking at and playing. Space Rebels is my Star Wars hack for Year Zero Mini. Possibly Year Zero Light, we'll see how that goes. But really, I've developed that also as a Year Zero Kids type of implementation thing. So I've been playing this game with my son, who's now 7, but we started really playtesting it when he was 5. There's very few words on the character sheet. There's a lot of iconography, so it's easy to see what's what. And yeah, I've kind of based it on the West End Games take of Star Wars. Because that's the first role-playing game I ever played, and I really love it. So there's a lot of similarities there. But that's a game that also I've kind of written some of it. It's probably close to being playtest ready. There's some other cool things like Mouse Ritter style inventory, which I really like. My son really likes. So you're kind of like physically moving little cards around on the inventory sheet. Mouse Punk is a game which I have nothing more than a sort of elevator pitch for, but that's basically mixing Mad Max with Mouse Guard. So post-apocalyptic, deserty, Australia-y sort of setting. It's going to be very vague. You play mice. There are mouse communities around, and you basically are playing kind of like post-mice, traveling between keeping the lines of communication open between villages, keeping the paths between these settlements clear of dangers. So kind of like a mix of there's a comic called Wasteland. I think it's called Wasteland, which is also about this sort of like postman who travels between communities in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Or the film Postman with Kevin Costner. I think it's based on a book I've not read. So all those kind of elements mashed with Mouse Guard, but then in this sort of Mad Max sort of flavor of setting. So that's a project it's just an elevator pitch at the moment, but it's something I plan on coming to at some point in the future. For Year Zero Mini, I've got Electric Dream, which unfortunately I think I'm gonna still keep the title. It's not actually, it's written kind of in a slightly different way, so it's Elec_Dream. It's cyberpunk and it's Year Zero Mini. I've play tested it on the channel. I think there are maybe 1 or 2. If you look up Microchips on the channel, that's what it was called initially. I've done some other playtesting things with it as well. I really like it. It just needs a little bit of work, especially on the setting that I'm pitching, just to make it really sing, but be contained to a very short word count. So yeah, Electric Dream will be out sometime in the future. For Year Zero Mini, there are a bunch of like short 1 or 2 sheet settings I've got planned for it. One is Runners, which is Victorian. It's based on I can't remember the name now. Something Street Runners, which were an actual historical group of people that were kind of predated the forming of the police in London. But this is basically Victorian London, and it's steampunk, but all the steampunk trappings are happening in the background. All of this new technology and the sort of ether that's being tapped into for magic is all in the hands of the elite, the people with money, the people with power, and you are basically playing the gutter scum kind of, the people with no power, the people with no money, and really you're also in this weird position where you are trying to solve mysteries for on behalf of the police in the slums, basically in the really horrible parts of London that are full of crime and full of poverty, full of disease. You come from that same place yourselves, and basically the crimes that the police can't go into these areas to solve because they'll basically be attacked. They leave to contractors like yourselves to go in and try and find out what's happened. So there's this big sort of play between being required for whatever reason, whatever the hook is, that you're connected to the police, usually probably blackmail or horrible things that have been done to you in the past, or bad circumstances, bad luck. You've got this link to the police. You've got this job that you've got to do, and at the same time, you're in this community which you're also trying to solve crimes in. And you're going to often be put at odds with the people in your own community. So there's this nice dichotomy between these two factions. I don't know how far I'm going to go with that. That was one of the very first projects I ever worked on, and it was like a Year Zero mini prototype way back in the day, many, many years ago. With Black Lives Matter and a whole bunch of other stuff, I don't know what my appetite is to return to that. I don't know how I feel about that. I haven't really touched it in many, many, many years. So that's one that I might come back to a bit later when I've got a bit of time to think about how I want to approach it in our current day and age, if you will. Other than that, I've got a game called Red Caps, which you play goblins on Hadrian's Wall in the borderlands between England and Scotland. And this takes place shortly after the Romans leave the British Isles in the 5th or 6th century, whenever that was. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think 5th century. So there's this power vacuum, and you're the Red Caps. You're these goblins from British folklore who are actually taking over Hadrian's Wall. You're there first. You're taking over Hadrian's Wall, and you just want to exist. You just want a place to call home. And then from the north and from the south, you've got the various different factions of Bretons and Picts or whatever, who are also trying to reclaim land, fighting each other, fighting you in between. So it'll be an interesting kind of like base building sort of style game, I think, but also a little twist on the sort of historical fantasy. Freaks is a game I've also play tested, Year Zero Mini. You play what I'm calling like shitty superheroes. So kind of inspired by Mutant Year Zero, which is kind of the same thing, but set in a contemporary setting. And you've got superpowers, which are really cool, but you're also like, you're a normal person. You can die pretty easily. So, yeah, it's like, it's kind of like maybe The Boys. I made this before the TV series came out, and I'm approaching it where you are the superheroes, but there might be a way where I can flip it around and make it into like a sort of The Boys style setting where you're actually superheroes exist, they're powerful, they've got some power, but they're taking advantage of it, and they're also easy to kill like a normal person would be if you can kind of get around their power. So that might be the twist I make on it, and maybe you call them, as the vigilantes hunting down the superheroes, maybe you call them freaks yourselves. So that's another one. Inheritors is nothing more than an idea, but it's basically you would be playing mainly gnomes in a post-apocalyptic British Isles where all the people have died. And so all of the Fae are coming out of the woodwork. There's no need to hide from the big people anymore, and you're slowly recovering the lands of humanity, the world of humanity after it's all kind of after everyone's died, probably from a plague or something. So yeah, you would play a group of gnomes, and again, kind of like Red Caps, you're filling in this like vacuum of places that you can inhabit, but there are other Fae factions who will be kind of also interested in your land and fighting against you. Xenophobia is another one on my list. That is you playing colonists in the far future on a planet where you have crash landed. There's no going back. I mean, this is a fairly staple trope in sci-fi. So you're stranded on this planet. There's no hope coming for probably a long, long time. Your ship had all the stuff that was needed to terraform and colonize this planet, and that's what's been happening. However, the planet is extremely hostile to you. So there are going to be things like, I haven't really thought through this one too much either. It's more of an elevator pitch in my head still. But the idea is that there is both flora and fauna who want to eat or kill the human settlers. So that's an interesting one as well, I think. I'm kind of excited to come to that one at some point in the future. And then, of course, last but not least, in terms of Year Zero Mini, Sofia Peralta has written a setting called Scraplands, which is basically mechs mixed with Mad Max. So it's Mad Max, but instead of cars, you've got these like small scrap mechs that are kind of car-sized. And it's kind of there have been 2 passes at writing it. It's on my plate now for something I need to edit and get out. And that's actually probably going to come out hopefully this year as well, because it's mostly written. I just need to finish it off. That'll be a free setting for Year Zero Mini as well. That's all my Year Zero Mini stuff. It's pretty much all my list. The one thing I haven't really mentioned are my Free League workshop ideas, because I have a big old list of them. I'm not going to be talking about those because they're fairly easy for someone else to take the idea from what I've said and go and make it themselves. And then that's potentially a loss of a very small amount of revenue, but still it's revenue I'm interested in pursuing. So there are probably about a dozen workshop ideas I would like to do at some point in the future, whenever I get the time. A lot of them for Forbidden Lands. There are some for Coriolis. But yeah, Mutant Year Zero as well. So we'll see. Anyway, Michael, that was a very, very long answer to your question. I'm also obviously aware that I'm pitching some of my own projects to the wider public who might not be aware of what I'm working on or have worked on in the past. If any of you find any of those interesting or you really like the sound of any of those, please drop a comment down below and I'll see it and respond to it. It kind of gives me a good gauge of what people are kind of interested in, of the stuff that I'm planning on working on at some point in the future. Anyway, last question from Rogue Non Grata. Do you have any notable lessons learned or perhaps just a new practice that you're experimenting with that has been helpful in your game development process? I have written down 5 things that are basically lessons learned and have been a refinement of my like writing and development process that I'm going to give. There's a kind of a 6th one I'll mention as well that isn't really applicable maybe to a lot of people, but is applicable to me with a YouTube channel. So the first one is work on only one project at a time if you can, or maximum 2. And if you're doing 2, make sure the second one isn't as big as the first one. So one big project or one big and one small project. If you're trying to work on multiple things at the same time, nothing gets done. This is what I tried to do. Initially, I tried to plan out my weeks. So it was like 1 week I would work on this project, the next I work on this other one. And it really didn't work. My brain was carved up into so many different creative like sections that I just found it really hard to get back into one. Some weeks I would really be interested in the one I had just finished the week before, and I'd be like, actually, I'm going to keep working on this one. And it was just chaotic. It was absolutely chaotic. So you might, if you have some cool ideas, write them down, capture them somewhere. I use Trello for that, so that you can come back to them at a future date, but try and stick with one project at a time. That said, second point is don't be afraid to park a project and come back to it at a later date. I've done that on a number of projects, and every time I've come back to them, they have always been better for it. It's just letting things percolate in your brain, getting out of a sort of creative, I don't want to call it a rut, but it's kind of like you get stuck in a rut of how you think this game should be made, how it should be developed. And if you just continue plowing on with it, it's hard to get out of that rut. You kind of get stuck into this way of doing things. Whereas if you can kind of park it, it's easy then to step out of that rut. And when you come back to it, you've come back to it maybe working on something else in between. You've got a new fresh pair of eyes. You might have read a cool game. You might have had some cool ideas. You might have watched like a TV show or a movie or something or read a book that's really inspiring that can actually help you get back into a new groove. And it's always every time I've done that, it's always been to the benefit of the product, so much so that I would almost recommend planning on a gap of time, like a sandwich year, if you will, or a sandwich period of time on creative projects. Don't think about it. Don't do anything with it. Just literally park it. Obviously have it well documented so you can come back to it well, and then come back to it at a certain point with a fresh pair of eyes and really yeah, I can't recommend that highly enough. Third point is pay for some artwork at the start. I'm saying this obviously. This is something I've done in quite a few projects. I've done it for Mousepunk. I've done it for Nord Saga. I've done it for Pitchfork, Stiletto to an extent, and there's probably one or two more that I've done it on as well. But I did all these, like, I've paid for art for all these in the time before AI art became a thing. I would still pay for art rather than get free art, because it's a big motivating factor when you've invested some of your own money into a project to make you want to keep going with it. If it's just something that you found off the internet, like what I have done with some of my projects, Runners, for example, the very first one I started on, I found some kind of like wood carvings from the Victorian, the Victorian time, Victorian era, and I used those as sort of like inspirational artwork prompts. But because I had invested no money in that, it was pretty easy to kind of work on it for a bit and then just be like, well, okay, let me work on something else, the next new and shiny, if you will. And the games that I've actually invested money in to an artist, so basically give them a brief, an art brief of what I want drawn. And it's usually, I kind of go for what's kind of like cover art. I want like a piece of cover art. So full color, usually, either landscape or portrait of a certain scene. I usually give in the brief the scene that I want, but I try and leave some of the details a bit vague, because I want them to interpret what I've kind of described and see how it's maybe changed a little bit in their interpretation of it. And every time I've done that for like the 4 or 5 projects I've done it on, those are the projects that I am most excited about, the ones I've spent the most time on developing, and the ones that I'm almost definitely going to finish, even though none of them have been finished yet. But they're all the ones that I'm actively working on and plan to actively return to. So I think for me, that's a big source of motivation. You've invested money into it. It means that you want to make sure that you get a return on your investment in a way. Even if you're planning on providing it for free, it's a kind of a mental thing where it's like, okay, I've invested money in this thing. I definitely want to make sure it comes to fruition. Fourth one is music. I like having background music when I'm working, and for me, that it has to be music with no lyrics to it. So classical music, not really classical music. I tend to find like it just really depends. The project I'm working on, I will tend to look for playlists on Spotify. A lot of people do RPG playlists, so I'll find a game that's similar, and then it's usually a mix of like video game soundtracks and those sorts of things that are just like in the right sort of theme and mood. I tend to go for things that are either darker or horrific to suit the themes I'm with. I don't tend to go for the kind of action-packed playlists. But having those running in the background helps me kind of get in the mood. It helps me kind of stay focused on the game, and is a very helpful thing to have. I recommend Spotify. I've bought a premium account or pro account, whatever it's called, with Spotify, so I don't have to listen to ads. And I just find Spotify better than YouTube for a variety of reasons for listening to music. So yeah. Fifth one is using a computer with no apps. I don't always do this, but every time I do it, my productivity is better. I have a laptop, and I have installed Linux on this laptop specifically because I want to use it as a work machine, and all of the development work I do is on Google Docs for manuscripts. And then afterwards, I will then, on my Windows machine with all of my awesome apps that I've got installed on it, all my games, all my video games, that's where I do the layout and stuff. But for the actual writing, I am much more productive when I don't have distractions of other apps going. So I won't have Discord up. I'll have a browser with one tab. That one tab will be my Google Doc manuscript. And if I need to do some research on something, I'll open a tab, research it, then close it. I don't have any social media open when I'm working on it, when I'm working on stuff. And yeah, unfortunately, I don't do that so often because my laptop is downstairs. I'm upstairs in the attic where my office is. And because I have a baby and a 7-year-old son, it's easier for me to work when I'm actually physically away from them up here. And I don't tend to bring my laptop up here because I'm like, well, I'm not going upstairs anyway. I'll just work on my desktop. So what I should do is I should probably In fact, I think I already can dual boot on this machine into Linux, so I could just do a dual boot into my Linux distro, and which is Linux Mint, I think, if you're interested on this machine, and then just work in Linux. But I tend to have everything open because I'm often doing other stuff up here. I'm doing a lot of Patreon and YouTube stuff. It's very easy for me to get distracted, not with games or things like that, but with all the other stuff on my plate. It's all set up nicely and easily for me on my machine upstairs. So it does generally mean if I want to do some writing, I don't tend to do much of it at my desk. That was number 5. The sixth one is I did dev diaries in the past on my YouTube channel, and that was a way of kind of kicking my arse a bit into actually doing some dev work sometimes when I might have had other stuff on my plate. Knowing that I'm going to do a video where I'm going to be doing development work for 2 or 3 hours, like a live stream kind of. Even though not very many people watched them, it was a quite a productive thing. And I'm actually going to be starting those back up in October. I've created a new tier on my Patreon called the Scholar of the Skulls, and the Scholar tier is basically will give people at that tier access to watch these dev diaries. These dev diaries are only going to be on Patreon. I'm not going to be putting them on YouTube, or if I have them on YouTube, they're going to be unlisted. And it basically is just me live streaming development. Me developing a game and like kind of talking to an audience, even if nobody's there. I'll be kind of talking to you, kind of going through my process as I'm writing. So that is a bit of a slower way to do development, but it does actually let you get the work done. So that's kind of one that you could do. It helps if you have an audience. I think if you're just recording on YouTube for no audience, like if you haven't got a YouTube channel or you're just starting off on YouTube, it's not a way you're going to get a lot of subscribers, but it can definitely, I don't know, like maybe just recording yourself might be a way of helping you to get into the process. It helps me a little bit with getting into a regular flow of things. It has in the past. I've not done it for probably about a year or so, and I'm planning on starting it monthly again, as I said, next month. So we'll see if it works again. Anyway, those were all my questions for September. Thanks to the 3 of you for asking them. And there'll be a new post going up on my Patreon at the beginning of October. I think the 3rd of October is when it's scheduled to go live. If you want to ask me any questions for October, when that post goes live, drop them in the comments, and at the end of the month, I will be doing another video for that. Anyway, that's me. Thanks very much. Catch you next time.